In episode 290 of the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, we're speaking to former US Navy SEAL Larry Yatch, and he's going to tell you how you can coordinate your team to be effective, just like a SEAL team. That's right, folks. You're going to get coordinated just like the SEALs today. Are you ready for this? All right, let's do it. Welcome welcome all to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, a weekly podcast series dedicated to helping you hit peak performance across the three domains of leadership. Those being leading yourself, leading your team, and leading your organization. This podcast couples my 20 years of military experience as a senior Canadian Army officer with world-class guests to bring you the most complete podcast of leadership going. And for more, feel free to check out our website at movingforwardleadership.com. And with that, let's get to the show. Yes, welcome all to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. It is Scott McCarthy, and thanks for coming out to another great episode. Super stoked about this one. It is always great having a former military officer on the show, and no doubt it's always great having special operators like members of the SEALs coming on the show and talking about their experiences and really talk about how they see leadership, because they operate at that peak level all the time. And today is no different with Larry Yatch, and this show is a ways in the making. We're trying to get Larry on the show for quite some time, and we're able to finally do it. So I was happy to bring this one to you. And actually, before we even dive into the show, if you're listening in real time right now, I just want to say welcome from beautiful Newport, Rhode Island. I am here. I'm on the Advanced Management Program with the US Navy. Super interesting, meeting all kinds of interesting folks, having some fun while I'm at it. Just got to finish a delicious meal, actually, and it is fantastic. So if you're in Newport and listening to this show, and not one of my classmates who's been forced to listen to my show for some unknown reason, but nonetheless, if you're from the area, do give me a shout out. I would love to hear from you. Beautiful part of the U.S., and it just feels great to actually be traveling again. So, yeah. Anyway, let's dive into leadership and not my journeys, shall we? So today we're talking with former U.S. Navy SEAL Larry Yatch, and he is the author of the best-selling book, How Leadership, quotes, Actually Works. And a couple of points that Larry brings out in his book is our jobs as leaders, from his perspective, is to coordinate action. Without coordination, nothing actually occurs. And the other thing that Larry talks about, and I'm still reflecting on this, I'm not going to lie. Am I 100% sold and bought into this idea that I'm about to tell you of how he views things? No, I'm going to be honest. I'm not 100% sold. But you know what? It's always great to have other perspectives. That is life, and we need to have other perspectives. So I'm admitting that, you know what? I'm still reflecting on this. And Larry kind of breaks coordination and not quite leadership, but just, being in a team down as three different roles. First role being the follower, self-explanatory. Second role, being the leader and having the vision and drive and motivation behind an idea. And then the final step being a manager and managing people's time, efforts, energy, resources, and etc. And Larry kind of argues that our time as what I call being leaders are better set at being managers to make sure that our leaders are going in the right direction. And in some regards, I understand that and I get it and I agree with it. We have to do that. We, as leaders, from my standpoint, we do have to make sure our teams are focused and coordinated and got the right resources and are moving in the right direction and going to where we need them to go and doing the things that we need to do them. But on the other hand, I don't believe in this whole dichotomy between management and leadership, and one is not the same. I believe that management is actually a component of leadership, that we need to be able to be good managers to be good leaders. And this is kind of where we diverge. Not to say that Larry's not a fantastic guest, because guess what? He is a fantastic guest. He does have all kinds of great points out there. I just want to put out there that I'm not 100% on board with everything he has to say, but I am not against what he has to say, neither. So, take it how you want to take that. But nonetheless, that is enough from me. So why don't you sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with former US Navy SEAL Larry Yatch. Larry, sir, welcome to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. So good to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, man. So I always love having former military, and actually I've even had active military on the show, just because you get that connection immediately, right? Active, former, we can talk the lingo to each other. But first out of the gate, your background is U.S. Navy SEALs. What brought you to the SEALs in the first place? And then perhaps even more pertinent to the audience is, why did you become an officer and want to be a leader within such an elite organization as it was?
So the truth of the story is I saw Top Gun in third grade and decided I was going to be a fighter pilot before I left the movie theater, which is kind of
How
funny.
fitting of timeline is that right now?
Yeah, it's crazy. I haven't seen my dad for 3 years. He came to visit, and I brought him and my two boys to see Top Gun this weekend. So it was really kind of cool to go and have that experience with both my dad, who brought me there the first time, and then have my boys there. And I have to admit, it made me want to be a fighter pilot all over again. So it started with that. So third grade, saw Top Gun, decided I wanted to be a fighter pilot. From there, I think my dad, I was really excited about it. So he showed me The Right Stuff, which is another movie. And in that, all the coolest ones were from the Naval Academy. So I was convinced by fourth grade that I was going to go to the Naval Academy to be a fighter pilot, and started working on that path at that point in time, right? Like it was one focus and that was it. And then in seventh grade, a friend of mine gave me a sweatshirt that said Navy SEALs on it for my birthday. And it was just because it said Navy and had a cool logo. He had no idea what the SEALs were. I didn't either. This would have been like late 80s, early 90s. No idea. And I went to the library and literally in Dewey Decimal System looked up Navy SEALs. And there was a book, they had like 3 books there. And one of them was The Men with Green Faces. So I read that book, which is a Vietnam era SEAL book. And by the end of the book, I decided fighter pilots are pansies and I needed to be a Navy SEAL. So that was it. The officer side of it came from the momentum of being focused on the Naval Academy really early on. So it was less of a decision that was made in that moment and more of just because I'd set it as a goal. It was just kind of an expectation that that was the direction I was going. And ultimately looking back, that's one of the things I would have changed.
So interesting. We got a couple parallels going here. Um, I not as early as you, although I've been told very young that I decided
I was going to go to the Royal Military College here in Canada, so
Yeah.
equivalent to your academy, right? But that was grade 9, so I was told that was extremely young. You in grade 3 watching Top Gun made that
Yeah, fourth grade, I knew
made
about the
that.
Naval Academy and was set on that, which is like kind of obscenely early.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I've been told like grade 9 was too early, but lo and behold, you're
Yeah.
beating me out here. And the officer aspect was, for me too, was the same type of thing. It was like, oh, just by virtue of going to the college, I was going to become an officer. Therefore, I was going to become a leader. Now, that's interesting. You said though, if you were to redo it, that's the one thing you would have changed. Why is that?
For a couple reasons. One, as a SEAL, I wanted to operate, right? Like I wanted to blow things up and, be a sniper and do all of those things, which isn't, is much harder to do as an officer, right? It is your job is to manage those leaders. And as a SEAL, I'd say that community is one of the greatest communities for officers to operate, right? And in most of the other branches, even in most of the other special operations community, the officers don't get to actually do the work. Whereas at least as SEALs for the first 5-6 years, like you get to operate, and then if you're lucky, you can extend that out a little bit more. So one would be to be able to do the roles that I wanted to do as a SEAL. The second thing is uh, I was, you know, I'd say fortunate that going through the Naval Academy, I got to experience leadership early on, right? From the time I was 19, I was responsible for other midshipmen all the way both in the fleet and at the school. So I had that experience under my belt, but I didn't have special operations leadership experience under my belt. So being able to to go the enlisted route for 2-3 years, get that under my belt, gain that experience, and then go the officer route, I think would have enabled me to, one, operate longer, but two, be able to lead from a place of experience versus a place of not having any experience in the actual special operations portion of the job.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I find myself now, especially at the rank of lieutenant colonel, it's difficult to get there and operate per se because I'm very much operations focused, although I'm not a special operator. But right now, I sit in a unit that's high readiness, so not quite special operations, a little bit more advanced than just standard conventional
Yeah.
force units per se. I basically show up to work every day not knowing if I'm going home at the night because we could get a call to deploy and start a new mission somewhere. So you get frothy at the mouth, right? You want to get you want to get to doing something, and I control a warehouse where we house a whole whack of equipment, and I go down and check it out, and it's like, I'll be climbing into the trucks and checking out all the different gear, and the troops are like, "What are you doing, sir?" I'm like, "Oh, I missed the smell of diesel burning right now," because you want to be doing that stuff.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
let's talk a bit about the leadership, leadership aspects of it. As you went through your early career and stuff, what were some of the tough lessons you had to learn, or did it come natural to you as a leader to really motivate your teams? As I told you before we hit record, we talked about 3 domains of leadership here. So leading yourself, leading your team, and leading your organization. Across those 3 domains, what were some tough lessons you had to learn as a junior officer going up through the special operations?
There's in in the environment that we're operating in, it's not a very forgiving environment because the men that I'm supposed to lead, one, they know to the core of their being that they're stronger than me. They know to the core of their being they're smarter than me. They've been conditioned to understand that if it's humanly possible, they can do it, and most likely they're going to do it better than everyone else. And if I make a bad choice, they die, right? In that type of environment, there's not a lot of leeway for bad leadership. You just don't get a lot of chances. So I would say there's often a sense of, it was scary, right? Like it was an intimidating place to hold, knowing that I can't make a mistake, yet I don't have a base of experience to base all of my decisions off of. So I'd say that environment was a challenging environment to work in. One of the biggest lessons that I learned in leading men like that was I didn't have to motivate my guys, right? That wasn't something I had to do ever. If anything, I had to hold them back from doing stuff because they're such hardcore driven personalities. So being able to manage them into the right mission sets, into the right actions was a challenge. And one of the best ways to doing that was they needed to understand why we were doing something all the time, which has become a very important lesson for what I'm doing in the civilian world as well, right? That ability to very clearly and accurately explain the purpose behind the mission, the why, the desired end state that we're trying to produce was critical for harnessing these wild stallions that just want to run. And when you don't let them run, they want to break stuff. So it's a very, tenuous environment that you're in when you're dealing with special operators.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to some people, civilians, and they're like, "Oh, you have it easy as the military because everyone's motivated and they're disciplined and all this stuff." But you actually very eloquently describe the problem that comes also with that is that you kind of got to harness it and push it in the right direction and make sure that it goes in the right direction and not everywhere. So that desired end state is crucial. I know you write about it a lot in your book and you speak a lot about it, and we'll definitely get into it for sure. um, but let's talk about harnessing these teams and leading them in that right direction. What are some of the tips out there for the leaders listening that you could give them and say, okay, this is how we need to guide our teams to the right direction when they're dealing with these types of scenarios?
I would say the most important thing to understand, which is actually one of the greatest, I would say, misconceptions of how leadership and management works. It's one of this principle, I think, is one of the biggest. It's a foundational principle about what I write about in the book. And it's definitely a foundational principle of when we work with companies, when we change this paradigm, performance increases dramatically. And I figured this out not in the teams, right? A misconception when people hear what I teach and or what's in the books or what are in our our course content for our clients, they assume that was taught to me, right? These distinctions that I'm going to share with you were just taught to me in a class and then we leveraged it. And it wasn't like that. In the SEALs, it was sink or swim. Like you either led well or you were fired. Like you didn't get to be there. There was no like, let's teach you how to do this. You just had to step up and do it. Being able to perform at that level was a challenge, but most of us were ready for that challenge. I then go into the civilian world, start my civilian companies, and all of a sudden the teams aren't performing at all, right? That distinction or that difference between high functioning teams in the SEALs and the low functioning teams that I had created myself in my businesses offered me the opportunity to see what was different. And that's where this concept comes out of. The core understanding of leadership and management is backwards, right? The common understanding of leadership is that there's a visionary leader in the front, leading the way for the troops, and managers are a necessary requirement for putting the leader's vision into practice. So that's the common understanding. That is completely backwards. If I would have stepped into a SEAL platoon as the visionary leader that knew the answers and the direction of where we were going, and it was up to them as the grunts to just get it done, I would have not lasted a day. It was the inverse, right? I was the manager of leaders, right? So my job was not to lead my men. My job was to create and enable leadership at all levels within the organization. When I'm the visionary leader with managers that are implementing my vision, I can get more done than I can get done by myself, but I'm limited. If my job is to create leaders all around me and manage those leaders into effective action, then I'm ultimately infinite in my capability and capacity. So that distinction that a manager's job is to create, enable, and support leaders, And a leader's job is to evoke effective action in others, is a major distinction or change from the traditional understanding of a visionary leader with managers that implement their vision. So that would be the biggest piece, the biggest lesson that I learned in those high functioning teams versus what's commonly held in the civilian world.
It was, when I read the book, it was definitely a moment for me, and because I have my own thoughts around this, and everyone and their dog has their thoughts around it, and but I think ours are not exactly this, same, but they're highly compatible. I believe that I believe management is actually a core aspect of leadership. I can give all kinds of examples where, quote unquote leaders have run their companies to the ground due to poor management, right? And that's across all of the different domains and stuff like this, right? Because there's tons of them out there. Yet at the same time, managers who don't house less necessary quote unquote leadership skills, you know, their companies also crumble too, because that visionary to push them to the next level doesn't exist. Therefore, they don't innovate, they don't push forward, and suddenly another company comes up and overshadows them. So very similar. I did like how you break it down. You talked about, though, they're creating leaders across all the levels of organization, and you believe that is the core role of a manager. So that, and I liked how you put it. So you basically can have leaders everywhere that are kind of a mirror of yourself. So for the leaders that are listening to this, how would they go about achieving that?
So our language is critical, right? When you say the word manager, leader, leadership, management, everyone brings their own background of experience around those terms to the conversation, and we make the assumption that just because we speak English, we mean the same thing. And that's, to me, the biggest shortcoming, right? You and I probably have very similar views on like the specifics of what needs to be done in these different roles. We're just using different words for it. So what I first do is establish a real clarity around the words that I'm using and what they mean, so that we can then coordinate action, saying that these are mine, right? My distinction, what makes leadership distinct from management to me, is not right or the best. It's just the most effective thing I've found. And as long as we share the same understanding, we can coordinate action around that. So right now in most organizations, and for the leaders listening, I would go do this experiment. Go to the person that, if you're in the middle, right? Meaning you have someone who has positional authority above you, and you have positional authority above someone else, right? So that's the hardest role, because you are both a manager, a leader, and a follower at different points in time. If you were to ask your manager, the person that has positional authority above you, what is management? What is leadership? What is a leader? What is a manager? Hopefully they have an answer. It probably won't be good and clear. It'll probably be a set of examples. If you then ask the person underneath you, what is management? What is leadership? What is leading? What is managing? You're going to get a different answer, most likely not very clear, and with different examples. Oftentimes there's conflict, right? What I think of as management is what you think of as leadership. What you think of as leadership is what I think of as management. When I ask you to manage a project, you're thinking lead a project when I want you to actually manage it. When I'm asking you to be a leader within the project I'm managing, you think manage it instead of lead it, right? That creates problems everywhere. So the first step is to draw a line in the sand and say, for our organization, for our team, this is what leading means. This is what managing means. This is what leadership is. This is what management is. This is what the actions that we expect around those. That, if you ask anyone in my organization, top, middle, or bottom, from the newest employee to the one that's been around the longest, what is leadership? What is management? What is leading? What is managing? What behaviors do we expect as a manager? What behaviors do we expect as a leader? You would get the exact same answers word for word from every single person. That is the first step to creating highly coordinated action. I don't care what your definition is, as long as it's consistent, as long as it's clear, as long as it's actionable, and as long as everyone in the organization holds the same one, it'll work.
Love that. I found that section particularly interesting as I read through your book, for sure. And it just went, it was like a crystal bulb went on. And, you know, I read a lot doing this gig. I read a lot because I get a ton of authors who come on the show. Basically, everyone who comes on the show every week has a book that they're talking about / presenting or whatever, right? So I read a ton, and that's the first time that I've come across that type of written work regarding language and the importance of language. And just as you summed it up in the end, it doesn't matter as long as we have a common understanding. And one of the things I do, so I host a mastermind community, the Leader Growth Mastermind, and we have weekly calls, and I provide them with curated content every week and stuff like this. And today I threw them a challenge just randomly in our group. I said, hey, email when your subordinates, or for the people who are actually not even leaders yet, but they're yet in the mastermind because they want to grow so that they're better prepared when you get there. I said, or a coworker, and just be appreciative of something they've done lately, right? So I do challenges like that. So I actually took a note. A challenge in the future will be have a sit down with your supervisor one-on-one and make sure that you both understand the definitions as you said it, so that now they will have a better understanding of what they mean. So
so what you just said is really interesting. You have people in your mastermind, right, that are not leaders yet. Now, I would argue that they're not a manager yet, right? A manager has positional authority, right? Every manager has a title, and from that positional authority, they are responsible for the behaviors and actions of others, right? Everyone leads from the perspective of a leader's job is to evoke effective action in someone else, right? Because we know that there are managers that don't lead, right? There are managers that don't evoke effective action directly in other people. And there are individuals that don't have a title, don't have positional authority, that often evoke effective action in someone else. Therefore, they're leading. And that's why that distinction is so important, right? Anyone that directly evokes action in another is leading. Anyone that is taking effective action is following. And anyone that has positional authority, meaning you have a title, you have the obligation to manage and the choice to lead. And ultimately, a manager that has to directly evoke action in someone else is doing a shitty job managing, right? My job as an officer in the SEALs was to do nothing. If I did anything, I failed in producing an environment where my men are in effective action, right? They should always be coming to me like, you don't do anything around here, right? What do? You sit in the office and eat cake? Like, what's going on? If they're saying that, then I'm doing my job managing well, because they are always in taking effective action. They know exactly what actions to take. They have all the skills, the knowledge, they have all the support to do it. They're not getting bothered by anyone above us, stopping them from being in effective action. And they're able to dance between leading and following without me directing it. If I do that, I appear like I'm doing nothing.
I fully agree with you. Yeah. Good catch on the word for sure. But yeah, you're absolutely right.
It's empowering, right? For you, like, it's empowering to know that it's bull that there's not one person out here that has lived that has not led another human being into some effective action. Therefore, we are all leaders. Do we all have potential to lead at a better level? Of course. Are we all managers? No, we all don't have titles. The title is what gives us the positional authority and the responsibility to manage, but we are all leaders, and we all have always been leaders. Go to a playground and you can watch kids switch between leading and managing 100 times with no one having any issues with it. We get trained out of leadership because we're born leaders. One of the best leaders in the world is a newborn baby. They can get any adult to do anything around them, and encourage effective action for them. So we are born leaders. We train ourselves out of it, or we get trained out of it by society.
That's a super interesting take on it, I must say. It really is. And it kind of flips, as you said at the beginning of the show, flips it on its head for sure. Because we all have this, thought process for sure that, leaders are up there and then it's kind of managers. But I definitely like, your thought of it. You're basically a manager of leaders to make sure that, as you say, they're taking effective action. And the big thing in your book that you've talked about is the coordination, right? The
Yep.
coordination aspect of it. So with that, from a leadership or management for you perspective, uh, what are some of the areas regarding coordination where you find people are failing out there, and how can the listeners out there make sure that they're doing it right?
I I answer this always from when I left the SEALs and started building teams and business. I failed at it. Like, I wish I could say it was a home run out of the park, but it was not. It was a disaster. Uh, we produced great results, but at a significant cost, both personally and for the team, the members of the team. And that trap of high perform, like, as a high performer, I'm never going to fail, but I will burn some people out on the way to quote unquote success. And in that environment, it provided me with an opportunity to see, like, what was different. What did we take for granted in the SEALs that didn't exist in the civilian world? And so I think that's the best way to answer your question. Is there are three core things that, as a SEAL, I took for granted, like breathing. Like, I didn't think about it. You don't think about breathing until it's taken away from you. This was the same thing. And when I got into the civilian world, I again just took for granted that these things existed, and they didn't, and that caused the problems. So the first one is the ability to hold responsibility, right? I took it for granted that if a SEAL said he was going to committed to doing something, that he was going to do it. And he did all the time. Like, I can probably count on one hand the number of times that a SEAL made a commitment and failed to meet it. And most of the time they outperformed the standard of performance. Like, if I expected them to do X, they would do 10% more. I would say 10% of the time they do 40% more. Like, hey, do the inventory on the radio equipment. They come back saying, I built a software program that automates radio inventory. Like, well, I didn't ask you to do that. I just asked you to count how many radios were there. Like, it was that level of performance all the time. In the civilian world, if one of my people did 50% of what they were said they were going to do to an 80% standard, they were a high performer. Like, it is amazing to me. And the biggest failure that I see in civilian teams is loose commitments, making a commitment to hold a responsibility and not doing it. So that's the first one. The second thing is, as SEALs, the training beat any ego out of you. Ego killed, right? If I knew better, if I knew the answer, then I'm going to miss the more effective path. So they make sure that ego, that ego that drives us to those actions, gets beaten out of you. That also created an environment where you could give direct feedback to someone, which again was just like breathing. Like, they committed to hold a responsibility. They either held it or they didn't. If they didn't, I could give them direct feedback on either how to hold it better or find out why they didn't. They were good with it. They would implement it. In the civilian world, if someone made a commitment, didn't do it, and I brought up, why didn't you do it? I have people crying. I couldn't understand it. Right? The fact that I'm not all I'm doing is asking for why you didn't do something you said you were going to do, and there would be an issue. So that ability to give, receive, and implement feedback is the next huge piece of coordinating action. The last piece is planning. Like, blows me away in the civilian world that in most companies they'll do strategic planning once a year, and then after that it's all for yourself. Like, figure it out. Like, here's your goal, go figure out how to do it yourself. No one plans for anything. As a SEAL, we had 19 plans for every mission, right? We never failed to plan. We always planned to fail. That planning to fail, those contingencies, identification of contingencies ahead of time, followed on the heels of having no ego, knowing that those solving those problems before we went in the field saved our lives. So those three pieces of being able to hold responsibility, being able to give, receive, and implement feedback, the ability to plan, and ultimately plan for failure before it's important. That is the I'd say the three foundations of coordinating action at a high level, and the things that are so sorely missing in the civilian world from my experience.
Man, we have such overlap of experiences working with companies out there. My biggest things is accountability. So it kind of overlaps your
Same
first two.
thing, yeah, responsibility.
You're right. A huge issue with accountability. I feel like you're like, oh, he's not doing. I'm like, well, have you talked to him? Well, no, but he knows what he's supposed to do. I'm like, no, he doesn't. Until you actually tell him that what he needs to do or what he's doing wrong, he's just going to keep doing the status quo. And then the ego thing, absolutely. And the ego thing I always find interesting, and I find it's a bit driven because like especially in sales, you're a top salesman, salesman of the year, salesman of the year, salesman of the year. Congratulations, you're promoted to be the manager of sales, and all of a sudden you suck. And you're like, why? But they have an ego, and it's like, well, no, duh. You've been telling them for years they're the best, they're the best, they're the best, and you're giving them all these awards, and then they show up. Of course, they don't have a huge ego. And the planning thing just drives me. I was like, they have this goal. There's two things I find when planning. When I work with my civilian clients, it's either they don't understand backwards planning, i.e., desired end state and working their way back to achieve it, or they don't understand alignment and making sure all the different pieces of the pie across the organization are aligned to meet the overarching goal.
Coordination.
Coordinate. Well, not just coordination, but alignment. So, for example, I was working with one client who's in sales, senior VP of sales for his company. If he achieved his sales goal, he would break the operational arm of the company because they would not be able to produce enough of their product to meet his sales goal. I'm like, this doesn't work. Like, one aspect cannot be at the detriment of the other, especially when you're talking about two core things, operations and sales. It just blew my mind. I just couldn't believe it. So, one thing you mentioned that you talked about, you skimmed at it quickly, and that was burnout. And I know you talked about it in your book about yourself burning out. You talked about it burning out others. So, what were the lessons you learned there through your experience on leading yourself and making sure that you, as a leader, you keep on top of your game, and at the same time, you don't destroy your team in achieving your goals, but allow instead to uplift everyone to go even further?
So, we've been conditioned to understand success in a way that guarantees that we can't achieve it. We've been conditioned that based on a school system that was designed during the Industrial Revolution to provide factory workers to factories. We no longer rely on factory workers or factories in the traditional sense. So the school system is based on a system of work hard today, get little treats along the way, and ultimately you'll be able to be successful in the future if you work hard enough. So we have an idea that success is a making a goal or objective and achieving it. And we all understand that hard work and suffering is necessary for achieving any goals or objectives that are worthwhile. If that's the case, then we will live a life of struggle. We meet our goal or objective. We experience success for a few seconds or a minute or two, and then we set another goal or objective that we struggle to. That will lead to a life of struggle interspersed with these little treats, waiting for the big payoff at the end when we retire. That time may never come. So by being a high performer, we know that we can work harder and struggle worse or better than anyone else, which will produce the biggest results. and will lead us to a life of never experiencing success on a daily basis. What I've come to learn is that success is not a goal or objective to achieve. That's accomplishments, right? This is where I go back to precision and language. If you set a goal or objective and you produce or meet that goal or objective, you are producing an accomplishment. Success is an experience that a human has. So success is a feeling, not a thing, right? I can't buy success. I could buy whatever car I wanted, whatever house I wanted. That doesn't produce an experience, a positive experience. That is an accomplishment to achieve. So our distinction for success is an optimized daily experience that's sustainable over time. Shifting from a concept of struggle today for a gift tomorrow into the concept that my goal is to produce an optimized daily experience for me and make that sustainable over time. Produce an optimized daily experience and make it sustainable over time for my team, and produce an optimized daily experience sustainable over time for my clients. The sole purpose of a business is to produce feelings of success in the clients, our team, and the owners of the business. If we do that, then we get to experience success on a daily basis. So that's the biggest thing that has allowed me to not be leading myself towards burnout. I have to put focus on what the daily experience I have is. I have to put focus on what the daily experience of my team is. And I have to put focus on what the experience of my clients is with my organization. If all of those are optimized and sustainable, then I not only will have a successful business, meaning a successful experience, but I will produce big accomplishments as well.
I really like that. I like the definition, especially the experience of success. You talked a bit about it in your book, and it was eye opening. And the language aspect of your book, it was awesome. I really like that, and it just it's eye opening. It's like, you know what? Yeah, he's right. Like, oh, you've been successful because I've been told that. Oh, because you've been born so young and blah blah blah, and you have this and you have that. Well, no, I'm successful because the podcast brings me joy. I get to talk to amazing folks like yourself. Um, and sorry to say, you're not the you're not the first SEAL I've had on the show. I've got to talk to a number of SEALs, from Mark Devine to John McCaskill and John Havlick, and there's more yet. But anyway, but still, some big company execs and all kinds of different, and some small company owners who have done some great things as leaders. So it's like, it's that feeling. And then, and just talking to my mastermind, and seeing them, actually one person messaged us this week saying, "Hey, I'm going to miss your call this week, the group call this week." And it's because I've dropped something that I've not enjoyed. And we were talking about, routines, and we got on the topic of physical fitness and how it's a great stress reliever and all this stuff. And she was saying how she hasn't done anything lately. Well, moral story is she's dropped things, and now she's picked up tennis, which was a love that she had long ago, but she had let it go. And now she's excited. And I'm like, that makes me feel good. And now, after reading your book and chatting with you here today, it's like, that's success.
Yeah.
That's just a feeling of success right there. Like, sharing, yes, that's awesome. Someone else that is, moving in a better direction today than what they were yesterday. So,
well, why do we strive to produce more money? What's the core reason? There's a couple. There's two or three, but they always come to the same thing.
I would say prestige is one. Like, just the illusion of prestige, i.e., and as well as people just want more stuff.
Why do you want more stuff?
Probably back to the prestige thing, I would say.
Right? Why else? That's one. Why else? Why do you buy a new sports car or a boat or a new house? What's the core driver beyond just to someone else to see it?
I don't know. Tell me.
The experience.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I know about the house, but the boat, definitely.
Right, that's the core reason, right? Like, the core reason that we buy money, the first piece is security. We got to take care of security first, right? Once we take care of security, we start buying our wants, right? Our needs are taken care of. We start getting into our wants. Why do we have wants? We have wants to be able to produce good experiences, right? Why do I want a bigger house or a nicer house? For the experience of living in that house. Why do I want a nicer car, a faster car? For the experience of living in that. Why do I buy a boat? To be able to spend time with loved ones doing something I enjoy. So the only reason that we strive for money or more money is to be able to buy experiences. Well, if you spend your whole life miserable producing and collecting money, never using that money to produce an optimized daily experience, you're not successful regardless of how much money you have. Right? I have a number of clients that have upwards of $500 million. And some of them are the most miserable, they have the worst experience, miserable experience of life. Yet they could buy anything in the world because they've actually come to the place to know that buying something doesn't produce a feeling of success. It's enjoying the things that you buy with the people that you love that gives you a feeling of success. And if you don't do that at the expense of earning more money, you will never win.
No, there's so much truth in there. Actually, I remember hearing a statistic. I believe it was around 80,000 US for the states. I believe it's around 80K. Maybe it's probably now 100K. But anyway, that's the point where people live comfortably, and after that, the increases in pay become negligible
Yeah. So
to their
what?
quality of life.
Yeah, a guy from I think it was Harvard did a study around happiness. That's what
Yeah,
you're
there we go.
referencing, and he
Yeah.
was he was tying the increase in dollars earned to the increase of happiness the dollars brought, and he found that there was diminishing. It was very sharp, right? Like when you go from 0 to 30K, like it's a lot of happiness comes, right? Then it starts to slow down up to about 80,000. I think now with inflation, we're probably talking 100, 120, right? But after that, increases in money brought less happiness. And eventually it turns to a negative where the cost of producing the money decreases the happiness experience. So you actually get to a point of diminishing returns where not only do your returns become lower, they actually become negative, where that's why I have no desires to be a billionaire. I've seen what it takes through direct contact coaching and work with people that have $1 billion. And the life that it requires to have that much money is not going to produce the experience that I want on a daily basis. My happiness will not, it would be impossible to produce that result and have the life and happiness that I want.
Man, what a diverse conversation today. We talked about language and happiness and money and then leading high performing teams and everything else in between. Larry, this has been fantastic. Before we wrap up the show, though, we've got a couple last questions for you. The first is a question I ask all the guests here at the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. As according to you, Larry Yatch, what makes a great leader? Or in your case, manager?
Well, it depends, right? So, if we're talking about leaders from my perspective, which is directly evoking effective action in another, let's stick with that, right? What does it take to be a great leader? Uh, Understanding the purpose of those that, and when I mean purpose, that which drives them forward, understanding the purpose of the individual and creating alignment between that purpose and the purpose of the team will drive effective leadership 10 times out of 10.
Yeah, that's awesome. Final question of the show. How can people find you, follow you, be part of your journey, grab a copy of your book? It's all about you right now.
Yeah, so within that piece, as we've said, launched a book just over a month ago. This book has taken our 10 years of experience working with what are large companies and given us the opportunity to share that with individuals. The title of the book is How Leadership Actually Works. You can find it on Amazon. Audible, all of those areas. If you go to howleadershipactuallyworks.com, the book website, that's the best place to get in contact with us. You can find the book there. We have some assessment software we built for larger companies in assessing where they're coordinating action well and where they aren't, that we've offered on that side as well. And we just launched a group for individuals to be able to implement lessons from the book. So all of that can be found at How Leadership Actually Works.
And for you, the listeners, easy as always, just go to lead.boss/230, and the links are in the show notes. Larry, my friend, thanks for coming out and talking to us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And that's a wrap for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. But you know what you could do to truly support the podcast? And no, that's not leaving a rating and review. It's simply helping a friend. And that is helping a friend by sharing this episode with them if you think this would resonate with them and help them elevate their performance level, whether that's within themselves, their teams, or their organization. So do that. Help me, help a friend, win-win all around. And hey, you look like a great friend at the same time. So just hit that little share button on your app, and then feel free to fire this episode to anyone that you feel would benefit from it. Finally, there's always more. There's always more lessons around being the highest performing leader that you can possibly be, whether that's for yourself, your team, or your organization. So why don't you subscribe? Subscribe to the show via movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe. And until next time, lead, don't boss, and thanks for coming out. Take care now.